Memories are indestructible, but if we do not offer them shelter, they disperse and become lost in the eternal night.
Adam and Eve ate of the forbidden fruit and fell from grace, which was unfortunate for their posterity who might otherwise be enjoying the pleasures of the Garden of Eden. However, pleasure is not wholly denied mankind, who can attain it now by smoking Harvard 10-cent cigars. Such biblically inspired material peppered the pages of the local newspaper in 1894. With a dab of eucalyptol cream, a Parsons pill for billousness, and an 8-cent Mexican jumping bean, you were doing it in 1894. 1894 presented itself as a landmark year for the people of central Massachusetts, for it was then that Fitchburg High School and Leominster High School met on the gridiron for the first time. At a period of time when football was still gaining credibility as a viable sport on the high school level, it was haphazard chance that a rivalry as intense as that of Fitchburg versus Leominster could ever have developed. Over the last 89 years, many men and teams have savored the sweet nectar of victory and suffered through the bitter cold of defeat. Yet, the genuine sportsmanlike spirit which exemplified that first encounter between these two rivals has remained. Our souls carry with them that special competitive fire which was kindled back in 1894 when our forefathers stepped onto the gridiron and mutually partook of the forbidden fruit that is the Fitchburg-Leominster Thanksgiving Day football rivalry.
The Old Grad, written by Grantland Rice, probably around the time of Newt Rockne in Notre Dame. He hears the echoes calling him from days of long ago, when ghostly shadows beckoned him from days he used to know. And after backs that flung to charge and stricken forwards reeled, the mocking memory of youth has blurred the open field. The old thrill leaps to life again, and through the roaring cheers, he sees the youth that used to be beyond the drifting years. He feels the old stir in his breast where time has galloped past. The place is slashing speed once again in front of the attack. Why, it was only yesterday he heard the whistles blow and fought his way for some yards against a foe. The summer of spring is in his heart, but yet with mantle spread, he knows the snows of wintertime are thick upon his head.
A lot of people don't realize it, but this rivalry has survived about 4 wars, and it's still going on. They survived World War I, World War II, the Korean conflict, the Vietnam conflict. All these terrible things are happening all over the world, and things are falling by the wayside, but not the Fitchburg-Leominster game. It just continues, and I'm sure it's going to continue for another 100 years.
It's a good tradition, and it's a good rivalry. It's good, clean rivalry, and it's something that doesn't have to be pumped up. It's there. Fitchburg being our neighbors and our enemies on that day, and before and after, they're our friends, and I think it's just a natural thing.
I'm not much a believer in predestination. We all have our theories of existence, but the fact that the series is tied going into the 100th game is absolutely sensational. I don't think that's happened anywhere in the country regarding interscholastic football, regarding any rivalry. There's no explanations for it, except maybe to denote that the Leominster-Fitchburg football game is the great unifying force in the community. I've got to feel that every Thanksgiving Day, for one day, business people from the plastic factories in Leominster, from the paper mills of Fitchburg, the lawyers, the doctors, the Indian chiefs, the announcers, all get together in a mass to celebrate the community.
The pride and the tradition connected with the two communities project into the game, and so that you have people participating in these games that go back. For example, you could have a grandfather, then a father, an uncle, a brother. And I think that there's so much significance to the particular contest. It's no longer a contest. What it is two communities vying for the attention of that particular day and having their community, their school, their team be the ultimate on that particular day.
When you were young, you watched the game and you always wished that you could play, and then when the time came for you to play, it was the most exciting feeling I could ever say I've ever had in my whole lifetime. To get down there at Crocker Field, or Doyle Field to play, and the big crowd, and you see all your old friends that you hadn't seen for a while that come back to see the game, and you know there's such great camaraderie there that you just can't explain it. It's something that you just never forget as long as you live. In fact, it seems as though you just keep thinking about it as you get older and as you go on, and you as I've played in the game and as I've coached the game, it's just the most exciting feeling anyone can ever get, I would say.
You're talking about, in my opinion, just a megaton effect every Thanksgiving. Names may be meaningless, maybe not, but each person that's ever performed, from the water boy to the guy with the yard markers to the guy watching, is part of this great scene. I don't want to be patronizing the event, but I was surprised in '73. I says, nothing better than St. John, St. Peter's, BC Holy Cross, Army, Navy. Talk about your great rivalries. I must admit, for sheer emotion, for an artificial high without any sort of artificial stimulant, you can't beat Fitchburg, Leominster on a Thanksgiving Day morning. To me, it's the absolute greatest.
Being involved in a Leominster-Fitchburg game is the greatest thing that's gone right through here. It's the greatest thing to happen to me, and I'll never forget it.
Going back to 1890, the population of Leominster was about 7,000 people. And it's hard to imagine, that today. But then the next 20 years, it more than doubled. Lots of money was made. And with everyone employed, naturally that showed up in your schools. And because everyone had enough for their family and for extras, these are the kind of things that make being able to have football. When times are very hard, then these are the things that are left out.
Well, we have to remember, and it's inconceivable to think of a time when there was no football. The sport was first introduced locally by a gentleman named William Kinney. He interested some of the boys, and they used to practice down at the Common. Finally, the high school boys, of course, became interested. But it was a very informal thing. The first game, for example, in 1894, the Leominster boys issued a challenge to the Fitchburgs, as they called them then. So the boys from Fitchburg got on a trolley car at Depot Square, and they came down, and they played Leominster in this 1894 game. And the games, as I understand it, from those who played them, were very informal indeed. Of course, football was very different then. The basis for the thing was what they called the flying wedge. And that was just a matter of everybody getting together and by brute strength driving right down the field. I have heard tales of taking the smallest member of the team, stuffing the ball into his jersey or into his pants, and just literally lifting him over to the goal line. The game began to catch on then, but it was still a very, very informal affair. The uniforms were very much improvised. There were no helmets or anything else. Instead of helmets, the boys would let their hair grow, a la hippie fashion, and that was a protective device for the head. And they would attach cleats to their regular shoes, and one old-timer told me years ago that after the game was over, they would take off the cleats and they would polish up the shoes for church the next morning.
The once sparsely populated communities of Leominster and Fitchburg were beginning to boom with industrial prowess. It was a time of national awareness. America was building a powerful structure, boasting new muscles that were changing the face of the entire nation. The people of Leominster and Fitchburg worked long, hard hours. The towns had become scaled-down kettles, part of a much larger melting pot that mixed people of all nations, each sharing the dream of freedom and seeking a better life. The late 1800s were times of hope. They were times when working men and women searched for a brighter future for their sons and daughters.
Fitchburg was a community of probably 40,000 people at that time. Leominster was a community of about 19,000 people. There wasn't the extreme want on the part of the Leominster people to pay for a good coach. Those were the Amiot years, and I think everybody remembers Clarence Amiot very favorably, and what a grand job he did in coaching the Fitchburg athletic teams.
He started to coach in 1913, just 2 years after he graduated. And I lived right in back of the high school. So as soon as I got home from grammar school, I would go home and change my clothes and beat it right down to the low playground to watch the kids practice. From the very beginning, I had tremendous admiration for Coach, because to me, he was a gentleman of the highest magnitude. And to be on one of his teams was a tremendous reward. The inspiration that he instilled in us fellows was outstanding. Without him, I don't know whether Fitchburg would have ever accomplished what they did accomplish.
Coach Amiot was one of the finest men, I think, that the area has known. He taught good, clean, hard football.
Coach Amiot had so many qualities and good qualities, and I think perhaps his ability to draw out the best from his players. A word of praise from him was, rare, but you were soaring for a week after he gave you a good word about what you had done.
Heisman came one Saturday morning, and he said to Coach Amiot, "What is the city paying you for salary?" And Coach told him, he says, "Well, if you'd resign here and come down and coach for Rice, I could give you an increase of $10,000. And Coach looked out the window toward the playing field, waved his hand out there. He says, "I wouldn't be interested. My heart is right out there on that field."
To the Mayor and City Council of the City of Fitchburg. In my opinion, the public schools of the city require an adequate field in which the different outdoor sports and contests, which contribute so much to the physical and moral development of our boys, can be held. I have recently acquired, for this purpose, the likes of the Circle Street property, so-called, and now desire to give it to the City of Fitchburg for use of the public schools. If this gift is accepted by you on behalf of the city, I shall proceed forthwith to have laid out a baseball diamond, football field, and running track. I propose to build a locker building equipped with a shower bath and other usual conveniences. It is my wish and request that this field be under the control and management of the school committee or such subcommittees as it may from time to time appoint. Respectfully yours, Alvar Crocker.
He was a gentleman of the highest magnitude. And the good that he did the city of Fitchburg People will never know. In 1922, the football team were Class A champions of Massachusetts. And prior to Crocker Field, they had all they could do to win the Wachusett Interscholastic League championship. And the following spring at Tufts College, the basketball team won the New England championship. And all of those things were mainly possible through Coach Amiot's inspiration and the gift of Crocker Field. After Crocker Field had been dedicated for such a wonderful place to play, with locker rooms, showers, and everything else, it was a lot different than the guys had over in Low Playground, when there was cobblestones out in the track, no goalposts, and they had to dress up at the YMCA, run up Elm Street to the Low Playground to practice. And it was so wonderful that even as freshmen, when we went to class in the afternoon, we practiced on Crocker Field in the morning. And it was, the very best part of education.
For many, many years, the game was held at Crocker Field in Fitchburg every Thanksgiving. There was no home and home arrangement because Crocker Field provided the proper facilities for the game. And so every Thanksgiving we all went up to Crocker Field. Now, you well know that there's a certain psychological factor there involved when the home team plays at home every year. And for many years, Leominster was the underdog. There was a long stretch, I believe, of 10 or 12 years from the great days of the Lou Little teams in 1910 up to the fall of 1925, when Leominster did not win one of the Fitchburg-Leominster games. I think they tied once somewhere along the way.
We had broken the series of wins that Fitchburg had over Leominster since 1912 right up through 1920, and 21 we tied. We didn't win, but they didn't either.
Fitchburg was up the top there and at top 5, and they were going to play Brockton for the state championship, and we knew we had to do something desperate to stop them. So we canceled the game with Clinton so we could concentrate on Fitchburg's plays, and we had the second string run those plays all week. So we know just what to do to stop them, and it worked when we got there. Joe Toppy was the main runner. He done the kicking and the off tackle and around the end, and every time he took the ball, he had a committee waiting for him. Red Barrett hit Toppy so hard that he dropped the ball. Dick Drummond picked it up and started a long run for about 60 yards for Dick Drummond. I was on the right of him. Ernie Gamage was in back of him. There was another Leominster player on the other side of him, and he was, I have never felt like pushing somebody so much in my life. And there's a Fitchburg on my right, and I don't know why he never tried to stop him. But we ran across the goal line 3 abreast.
I took the snow off the crossbar for the extra point, 7-7. That's the way it ended.
Biggest play in that game was Fitchburg's overconfidence.
The real enthusiasm for it began, I think it sifted down from the great enthusiasm that prevailed in the colleges in the 1920s. You know, that was the great Red Grange era, and the Four Horsemen and Notre Dame and so on and so forth.
The big thing about the Leominster-Fitchburg game is that there was such a great enthusiasm amongst the people.
It was also something of an intercity feud. People who'd never set foot inside either school would be throwing eggs and fruit at each other and so forth outside of the premises all over town.
In 23, we didn't play because there was a temporary break in relations due to an altercation in a basketball game at I think it was played in Leominster in the old drill hall at the Carter High now. Red Barrett and a boy named Beach, who was a big star for Fitchburg, came from Shirley. They got it mixed it up a little bit, so this was in basketball, so the relations were broken for that 1 year in football. That was 1923.
Red Barrett would quite often jab Beachy in the ribs with his elbow. And he did it so often that Beachy got kind of peeved. And during the halves, he mentioned it to Coach Amiot. And Amiot says, well, if he continues to do it, it's the first time that I've ever suggested to anybody that they hit an opponent. But if he does it too often and you can't stand it any longer, just give him a good hit in the chin. So about the third quarter, all of a sudden, Beachy hit Red Barrett with his left hand, and Barrett rose up from the floor a couple of inches, and then he fell forward, and his two front teeth dropped out. And that was the reason for the discontinuation of the football game the following year.
Leominster people hate to admit that we got clobbered by Fitchburg a couple of times. I played in 23, 4, and 5, and 24 we played in a rainstorm at Fitchburg at Crocker Field, and we got beat 48-0. And I think a year or two later, Fitchburg whaled us 64-0 or something, but we won the game in 25. That was the first time in 13 years that we'd beaten Fitchburg.
Well, the motivation was mostly what the coaches could, the coach, period, there was no coaches. We had one coach and he had no assistant. But he managed to get us motivated for the game based on the fact that we were going into the 12th or the 13th year without a victory from Fitchburg, so you felt like the poor boy next door, that the good things were not coming your way, and so that was motivation enough to get up for that particular game. And of course we knew that the fans of Leominster were there. They would really appreciate a win if we could muster it. 1924 we didn't do that. We got soundly trounced. But the following year we came out to avenge that, and we managed to beat Fitchburg 9-0, I think the score was, for the first time in 13 years.
We had been weakened somewhat by graduation, and we knew it was going to be a difficult fight, as they are every year. I think that on any given day, either team could beat the other, regardless of the season's records. But we knew that Leominster had an excellent team, the 1925 team. And it was a terrible thing to lose after my senior year, especially after having won for 11 years in a row. And I know that I recall just sobbing all the way home from Crocker Field.
Memories? Well, of course, the memory was the fact that we were tickled to death to have been the first team in 13 years to beat Fitchburg. And that is, we've taken that down through the years. We can always fall back on that, and it becomes something to talk about when the guys get together.
The drought had lifted. In 1925, Leominster rained down upon their red and gray arch rival for the first time in 13 years. The balance of power was shifting. Inspired by the victory, the townspeople of Leominster were ready to take steps that would tip the scales from Fitchburg domination to a greater competitive balance in the decades ahead.
You can win every single game all the way through the year and lose the Leominster game, and nobody will ever remember you. You can lose every single game during the year and come out a winner in Leominster. He says, and you're a hero, and you're a hero forever.
Boom, chicka boom, boom, chicka boom, boom, boom. He, ha, ha, ha. Leominster, Leicester, rah, rah, rah. Boom, chicka boom, boom, chicka boom, boom, boom. He, ha, ha, ha. Leominster, Leicester, rah, rah, rah.
The tradition is exceedingly significant. For example, this year, I happened to go up to the Fitchburg Holy Name football game. And the outstanding back on the field that day was Larry Shattuck. He ran for a 75-yard touchdown, and it's too bad because I understand that he's damaged his knee and he may not play in the 100th renewal of the game this Thanksgiving. But the reason I mentioned Larry Shattuck is he's the grandson of Larry Shattuck, a guy that I played with. And the kid that's playing now, his father was a star. So here's 3 generations. And this in itself is something that makes the game that much more interesting and important. And I think the advent of Doyle Field, the crowds have become larger, the publicity has been great, and everyone shows up for that football game. People you haven't seen for years and years and years, you see them at the Thanksgiving football game.
I believe athletic sports have a proper and necessary place in the education of youth and in the development of both physique and character. I also believe that wholesome sports for all ages and classes of people is good for the community.
In my opinion, one of the greatest reasons for the success of athletics in the city of Leominster is because of Mr. Bernard W. Doyle. He was one of Leominster's greatest philanthropists. He not only built the hospital, but he built all the Doyle Field in 1932. And that was right during the Depression. And I think much of the success of the athletic program in Leominster can be attributed to the tremendous football facilities that we have here now in Leominster. That football field in Leominster is one of the finest fields in New England.
You can't really measure all that comes out of all those fields that are there, the football games, the health, the good attitude that youngsters have. I look at Doyle Field often and think what a wonderful memorial to a person who has given so much.
I think the pride that Leominster takes in their football is revealed there in their field. Well, it is a great field. It's always very well kept. It's better than some of the fields I play on in college. And we win a lot of games on it, you know, and that's the biggest thing I have.
Well, I remember years ago, Mr. Doyle used to send me down 4 tickets to his box. Every year Leominster had the football game, and I remember afterwards he used to invite us up to his house for a few drinks. And I'll never forget telling him one day how much I thought that field meant to the city of Leominster and what a tribute it was, you know, to the citizens of this town to have such a great place to go to see a great football field. And a wonderful, wonderful thing it is for Leominster. And you know what Mr. Doyle said, Joe? He says, I'm not so sure that they really appreciate what has been done for the city.
Charles Bradrick succeeded Ray Comerford. Ray Comerford had considerable success as a coach at nearby Cushing Academy. And he was persuaded to come to Leominster, which he did. Ray was a very, very fine coach and a fine person. And of course, everybody was devastated at his sudden death. In the summer of 1931, he was at one of the South Shore beaches, and some child was caught in the undertow, and he went to the rescue of the child. The child got himself out of the difficulty and ran off up the beach, and Ray was drowned. And it was a great shock to everyone. I've always felt that Charles Bradrick was a great coach, but an even greater teacher. And I think that's where his real greatness lay. He was never demonstrative, as you probably know, towards the players. He was a very strict disciplinarian. But he was deeply and perpetually concerned about them and their welfare. I have seen him literally fight tooth and nail for a boy's chance for an education.
There are a lot of people coach football teams. Many of them, around the country, high school and everything else. But Charlie Bradrick was also a teacher. He was a gunner's mate 3rd class in the United States Navy in World War I. And I never heard him swear. I never had seen him smoke or drink. Okay? And he set a very fine example for the young people, and he was out there working with us every day.
He cared about his athletes, and he made that an important part of their lives, so that even if you went into church, the Sunday sermon by the pastor would be on the contest on Saturday.
Why do you play football? Why does a kid go out there and knock his brains out? He doesn't get paid, you know, and he gives up a lot, and maybe he might have been a little higher in the standing of the academic community, which might have been worth more. But I think he gave you something that no book can teach you. Perseverance, the old-fashioned virtues. If at first you don't succeed, try again. Don't give up. Now, I'll never forget one time we were playing a club down in the greater Boston area, and they supposed were supposed to lick us. It was Quincy High School. And the Boston paper had made a quote, Quincy at Leominster, not worth the trip. He put that out in the locker room, and he told us all week long, he kept telling us, you know, how can anybody evaluate you and predict the score when the game hasn't been played? He said, you'll never know what you're worth, whether you're playing football, or whether you're out on a job, or whether you're trying to meet the problem in life. You'll never know what your optimum is, he said, until you really try to dig way down deep in your reserves. And sometimes you'll surprise yourself what you're capable of doing. You never knew you had it in you, but it's there. And today, all Leominster expects of you is don't quit. He said, in fact, I'm ashamed that I said don't quit, because a Leominster team never quits, and that's the way he put it. See? And I've never seen a Leominster team quit. And we beat Quincy 46-0.
There's a communal spirit which encompasses the Fitchburg-Leominster football game each year. A feeling of competitive fire passed on from father to son, from brother to brother, from generation to generation. It is a feeling that grows ever stronger as game day nears, like the swelling tide, and it reaches its apex on Thanksgiving Day. For these are the rites of autumn, the stuff of which legends are woven through this ancient schoolboy rivalry.
Coming up here from Texas, I thought Thanksgiving would be just another big football game. I saw as many as 32,000 for a high school state game there in Texas. It was in the Cotton Bowl, and it looked like no one was there. So Thanksgiving morning, that fall of '67, it snowed a couple of days before, and the snow was piled up waist deep along the sides of the field, and it was raining and freezing rain, and having played in warm weather all my life, I just couldn't believe that we were going to have a football game. And then the stands were full on top of, you know, the rain and the snow, and John Hulecki had moved from a tackle to a tight end, and it so happened that by this great move by Huck Hannigan putting Hulecki at the tight end, we weren't ready for a tight end to receive the football, and they beat us about 18-0. And so as we were walking off of the field, the drunks was climbing over the fence and throwing snowballs and empty beer bottles at us, and right then I knew that it wasn't a football game, it was the Civil War all over.
High school players and perhaps coaches like to feel secure, and as soon as you felt secure that you finally had the upper hand, that seemed like the time that the other team would just rise up and say, like heck, you have the upper hand. And I recall the game I guess that most vividly was when the great Alan Glennie was leading the Fitchburg High team to an undefeated season, and we went into that game as a decided underdog. And I remember my words to Coach Landon as we shook hands at midfield. I said, I really hate to spoil your undefeated season, but we had that feeling when we left the locker room that we had the momentum coming our way right there and then, and we went on to win that game 40-18 and over a very excellent football team. But for that one day, we had it with us, and I think the Fitchburg players, perhaps being undefeated and wanting to feel secure that the victory was assured to be theirs, just didn't get up the way that we did. And we had that happen the other way around to us on a couple of occasions too. And I think in big traditional games that is just part of what might happen.
We'll have to go back to the 1972 team, the championship team we had that won 10 and lost 1. We were beaten by St. Peter's early in the year, but we beat Leominster that year also up in Fitchburg. It was a great ball game, and I'll never forget the play of boys like Mike LaSaucer and Bobby Watton at quarterback, and Rick Cruz, and the thing that stands out in my mind there was that we had a real good tackle named Bizzotto, and Bizzotto got hurt about a week before the game, or 3 or 4 days before the game, so we didn't know who to go to. So I talked to Coach Crank, he was assistant coach. I said, "What do you think, Coach?" He said, "Well, I think we'll go with Rick Cruz." And I looked at him with a very quizzical look. I said, "Rick Cruz, he hasn't played much all year." He said, "We're going to go with Rick Cruz." Well, I almost said to myself, I don't think he's going to make it, but I'll never forget that as long as I live. It was the most satisfying thing that I think I ever witnessed, was to see Rick Cruz out there playing a tackle for us and doing an outstanding job for us.
I don't think there was any doubts in any of our minds that we weren't going to win the football game. We just went in there and we knew and we were confident. We never were really pressured, although I have people tell me it was a close game years later. We just never felt like it was a close game at all. We just felt we went in there and dominated the football game.
Also, when Alan Glennie played for us, Alan was a great quarterback, and he had to fill in one year because we lost our quarterback, Chris Petrides, hurt his ankle playing basketball, which he wasn't supposed to have been doing. So Alan Glennie filled in that game, and Alan did a superb job. I don't recall a year, but it was up in Fitchburg, and we beat him that year, which it had to be a tough load to put on Alan's back, because filling in like that when he hadn't played that much all year long.
I first saw Alan as a raw sophomore quarterback. He had a lot of instinctive talents that you just don't develop in kids. He stepped into the Thanksgiving game that sophomore year and won the Bernard St. Germain Trophy, for the most valuable player from Fitchburg. We won the ball game 14-12 with a blocked field goal in the last 20 seconds of the game. Really an exciting game, and the most outstanding group of defensive linemen I think that Fitchburg High ever put together at one time was the Weesum threesome that was successful in blocking the field goal. Clyde Hutchins and Leo LaRoche and Mario Orsini. Those 3 kids weighed about a ton.
Those 3 games had to have stood out in my mind as the most exceptional games that I remember in the series. And of course, there were many other games that I had seen while a spectator and while I played, but these stand out in my mind.
Playing the football on that day, that's something that someone should experience in Leominster and Fitchburg, if you're involved in that. Being at the game, that's another experience, Being on the sidelines, being involved in the game, that's, I wish everybody could do it. It's not that way, but I've been on both sides of it where I can watch. I've participated in it, and I've just got total gratitude from it. And I've had my parents watching me, relatives, people that you go to, friends, just like us. We've all grown up together, and things have, that's a lot of it with this tradition around here. Everybody's close-knit. Everybody's tight together. We all feel the same way. Everybody gets psyched up for the game together. Even though you're involved in it, you're playing in it, you're doing it yourself, but everybody's behind you. Someone else is behind you. You'll be going out there tomorrow and playing it. Someone else will be giving you the backing and everything.
The tradition of Fitchburg-Leominster game has been given to us year after year after year, and it's more important than just to the players who play each year. It's important to the whole city and the town and to your family in years gone by.
I think everybody that has ever played, you got to be emotionally involved, because it's just something that you're part of, and I don't think they can ever take away from you.
And being there and just getting psyched for it, and just as psyched as the football players and the cheerleaders and the people in the seats. You get yourself psyched up. This is great. This is great. I'm glad. I wish every child and every adult growing up could experience something like this.
I've only been out here 10 years,
Of course, last year was a rout with Leominster winning easily. But yet we've seen some great games. The field goal by Frank Novak 3 or 4 years ago. Now, the inability of Fitchburg to score from about a half yard with 4 downs in 2 series games, both won by Leominster. And of course, in 10 years, the names, multiplying 40 times 10, that's 400 names, but certain people obviously stand out. I think Fitchburg's Pete Bergeron comes to mind. Last year, I thought Dave Palazzi was sensational. The first year I was here, you had the double combination of the late Paul McCumber and Paul Robichaud at quarterback, which has to be outstanding. Defensively, the Tom Palazzis, the John Crowleys, who was an excellent athlete. Before them, the Bob Mativiers, the Warren Muirs of the 60s. The names just keep rolling. The Rick LeQueers, who was always a favorite of mine when I did a broadcast game, and I used to go berserk. LeQueer, LeQueer, LeQueer. I never forget that name. Or Steve Ringer, who later went to UMass, an exceptional player. Jim Normanton, one of the best defensive players I've ever seen out here.
Chuck Acey, the great running back, the Cross brothers, both David and Dennis. There was Kevin Conway. There was the blocking stitches from John Jevakakis and Tommy Crank and Gumball, Queech, all the nicknames that we've got for him.
Jack Jerzyk, Dennis Belvo, Dennis Dalton, Steve Morey, Steve Allaire, Ricky Lato, Bernie Arugio, Les Meehan, Howie Shane, Bobby DeMello. Years after that, Alan Glennie, Randy Palmer, the Boudreaux twins, the DePasquale brothers.
I'd have to say that Warren Muir in 1963 and 64 put on 2 of the greatest performances that I had ever seen.
People I don't think would equate him with being he was a very intelligent football player. As well as being very fast and very physical, he was very smart.
He could run through trouble or run around it. He was that good. Usually you get a ball player that can run through trouble, but he can't run around it, or vice versa, but he could do both.
For instance, a punt in Leominster. Leominster was punted to us, and the ball was rolling in the ground, and happened to be a small huddle of Leominster players, and Warren got about a 2 or 3 yard head start, and went right between 3 of them and picked the ball up and headed down one sideline. He got to a roadblock there, a couple people changed direction, went all the way across the field, got to the other side of the field and turned up the field and headed into the end zone for a touchdown. It was something to see. He made good moves to set up blocks. I remember in the same game, he made a move on a kid, and I went to throw a block, and he went by the kids. I just stood there, kind of watched the whole thing as he ran into the end zone. He was probably the best I played with, and probably one of the best I've seen.
There's always been some outstanding players every year. And of course, 50 years ago, 2 of the most outstanding high school football players in the whole Commonwealth of Massachusetts played on the opposing teams, Billy Mackey for Fitchburg and Ronnie Cahill for Leominster. Every time a coach is asked, what was your greatest player, they always hesitate. They don't want to leave one out that was almost as good. There's no question there's been hundreds of good players, both in Fitchburg and Leominster. And I think probably 2 of the outstanding players, which to me was very unusual, is the fact they were opposing players on the teams of Fitchburg and Leominster. Was 1933. The left halfback for Leominster was Ronnie Cahill, who could do everything, and the left halfback for Fitchburg was Billy Mackey, who not only was a triple threat player, but he was left-handed and left-footed, which not common. You don't see too many left-footed kickers anywhere.
Charlie Broderick, Pat O'Brien found Reagan out there as the Gipper kicking a football. This is indicative of Charlie Broderick finding Cale. He happened to see Cale throwing the football around. The next thing you know, Cale became the key to his whole offense. The Notre Dame box, he was a triple threat star, and he started about the second or third game his sophomore year, and that precipitated a legend.
Since 1929, I've seen a lot of football players, and I think he was the best I've ever seen. He could pass, he could kick, he could block, he could run, and was a demon tackler.
It has been said by Dr. Eddie Anderson, who coached football for 38 years, and had the likes of Bill Osmianski, who was all-pro at the Chicago Bears. He had Niall Kinnick, who won the Heisman Trophy for him at Iowa. Nonetheless, he said that Ronnie Cahill was the best 160-pound football player that maybe has ever played the game. And don't forget, gazing in retrospect to Cale's time, he went both ways.
He liked to hunt. As a matter of fact, one day he went hunting, and it was about 1:15 before he got into the clubhouse, and I think that Roderick was looking at me, and of course that didn't make me feel too important, and looking at me and says, I got to go with this guy, you know. And then Cale come over the fence with a sandwich in his hand, and he went on to play the game.
He was an amazing football player. I think they say that the difference between mediocrity and greatness is the happy faculty of being able to relax under pressure. And this attribute Cale had in spades.
Jimmy Leo, as you probably remember him, he was an end who caught a lot of passes in the Leominster game. Joe Norton, Ozzie McLean, Laurie Shattuck, the Toccoletti brothers, Bob Schragle, Phil Valera,
Alton Case, Eddie Surratt, St. Anselm, Mark O'Toole, he was killed in the Air Force, Dick O'Toole, Mitch Lemoyne, back on that team, and I just wrote to Juddy Foster, he's out in Illinois someplace, and Jimmy Gardner, and after that, Candido Toccoletti, Fournier, he was city electrician here for a while, electrical inspector. Freddie Fournier, the Smith boys used to come up from Sterling. We got some good football players out of Sterling there. Elliot Blodgett, and then we had Elson Race and Bigelow, Johnny Bigelow. And Elson Race made 4 touchdowns against Fitchburg High School. And Conway back there. And the smallest one I can think of is Chubby Sully. He weighed about 120 pounds. So it goes to prove, you know, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, but fighting the dog that counts. And he was an excellent football player. He was, you know, he's one of these kids. He couldn't run, he couldn't pass, and you know, he couldn't tackle, but all he knew how to do was think and win.
Alfred Case had a cousin, a first cousin, who was a second-string fullback for Amiot at Fitchburg High, the same year. And they used to have straw on the sidelines, a lot of straw on the sidelines. And his name was Raymond LaRoche. He was built like a tank. And at one point in the game, when Amiot went to look for him, to put him in the ball game, he was sound asleep under the straw. I mean, some people get all excited about the game. Maybe he couldn't sleep all night thinking about it, and then he went to sleep during the game.
When I got out of practice, I used to hang around the Leominster Rec Center. And my cousin Ronnie Sedelli was a boxer at that time, and probably a lot of people remember that. And I was in the coffee shop at the rec center because I used to play pool, and it was a place to hang around where you wouldn't get into a lot of trouble. And his manager was John Conley, who happened to be the sports writer for the Sportsfolio in Fitchburg. In Fitchburg, I think they won 3 games that year and lost 5 or 6, and they lost some tough games. And John Conley was trying to interview me in the coffee shop, and I said, John, I don't think it's a good idea for me to say anything before the game. And he says, well, off the record, what do you think of Fitchburg? And I says, well, Fitchburg plays like a bunch of Lancaster girls, because at the time there used to be a girls' school down in Lancaster. And I said that just in jest, and 2 days later in the paper they had a big article, Leominster Star, blah, 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 about, in the first half of the Thanksgiving game my senior year, I heard all about the Lancaster girls every time they hit me. I thought I got hit by a Mack truck.
We didn't have a very good record. I think we were 2-6 at the time, but we were coming up to the game in good spirits. In fact, we played an outstanding game the first half of the game. The score was 13-13. And Leominster had some really good ball players, led by Dick Robichaud, Ron Palazzi, and we gave them quite a battle that first half of the game. And I've known Ron and Dick for quite a few years, and I know Ron Palazzi had been giving us the business a little bit, particularly a fellow by the name of Dick Boutwell for Fitchburg, who was a pretty tough football player, and I know Dick hit Ron pretty good a couple of times, and I can remember a CB, as he was known, Charlie Broderick, Leominster coach, as Ron was knocked down on the ground one play, coming out just telling him to get up. He did. I wished he had never gotten up. He came back to play an outstanding football game that day.
Barry McLean was the quarterback for Fitchburg, and he had a spectacular season. But Leominster was winning the ball game 14-0. The final score was 14-14. But I remember one particular play. Barry McLean caught a punt on about his own 20 and zigzagged into the end zone, scoring a touchdown. He was one of the most exciting high school football players I ever watched. And I've talked to Ozzie, and Ozzie was more worn out after the games than he was.
57 game was, we started the season with about 23 guys on the team. There weren't very many of us. We weren't that big, but we worked very hard. And we went down to Doyle Field that morning, and we were pretty good spirits, and we were ready for the game. And we proceeded to really do quite a number on them. The final score of 20-14 really didn't indicate how the game went. We ran up 420 yards on the ground, only threw one pass from Buzz Conlon to Dave King, and completed that. Leominster had 2 scoring plays. One was a 55-yard run by Bob Hembrough, who was an outstanding football player for Leominster, and Dick Robichaud, who I think quite a bit of as a football player, let one go. Must have gone for 60 yards to another outstanding football player, Marty Doopy, for a touchdown. Nobody ever thought anybody could throw it that far, but Dick did. And so at the halftime, the score was Leominster 14, Fitchburg 13. But we came out the third period, and we put another score on the board to go ahead 20-14, and that was the ball game. They couldn't do a thing after that. We went home. It was a pretty good day.
Ozzie McLean, as I said previously, have been old friends since before high school days. But ever since we got out of high school, it seems that we've had a $2 bet in the game, and for the last 11 years, I've been getting a very pleasant note from Ozzie with a $2 bill in it. And I like to see Leominster win the ball game, but I hope Ozzie, someplace along the line, winds up getting a couple of bucks from me. But speaking of Ozzie McLean, I can remember going up to Crocker Field to watch a high school football game, and Leominster was heavily favored to win. But it was a terrible day weather-wise and under the best of circumstances. Crocker Field in those days was a quagmire on June 6th.
The field was covered with about 1 inch or 2 of snow, and then the sun came out bright and really made the field a quagmire. And after the first few minutes of the ball game, you couldn't tell one person from the other. Neither team could move that much. I guess the biggest gain probably was 10 yards for either side. Everybody struggled to even just stay afloat. You'd go for a tackle, you'd miss in trouble, you'd slide 5-10 yards. And I get back to punt in the second quarter, and the center was good, and it came right to me, and it slid down the side of me, and I did one of the comedian where you reach for the hat and you kick it, and that's what I did with the ball. And the end come over and fell on it, and I guess they went about 20 yards, and they scored. And they were leading 6-0 at the half. They didn't get the extra point.
Amiot really pulled a very shrewd move. When Fitchburg reappeared in the field in the second half, they got on dry uniform. As a matter of fact, Ozzie McLean had a pair of rubber pants pulled up over his regular football gear. And in that game, that particular move really paid off, because Ozzie McLean swung the end for 15 yards with not much time to play in the ball game, and it was a big, big upset. Fitchburg won at 7-6.
You cannot take anything for granted in a Thanksgiving game, because the wrong bounce of the ball, or a rainy day, or a team not mentally and physically prepared to play the game can get knocked off.
think there are a lot of things that go into this game, and one of the things that always stand out to me are kids that you don't really expect to perform in the game or just be a part of the game. They're not a real vital part of your football team, but somehow every year a kid will pop out of the woodwork and really do something which will help his team win the game. And I think that's really part of what, you know, high school football is all about, especially a game like this. It gives a kid an opportunity, a kid who's been hanging in there all year at practice, really not getting a lot of opportunity to play in the game, but he's out there every afternoon working hard, and suddenly he may be in on a kickoff or an extra point, or if someone gets injured, he goes into the game, and suddenly he has an opportunity to really do something to help his team win. And I think a story which really, I always think of this story when I think of like the Fitchburg-Leominster game. One time I read a story about Woody Hayes, who was a great coach at Ohio State, and he was playing Michigan. And the Michigan and Ohio State game is very similar on a college level as the Fitchburg-Leominster game is on a high school level. And Michigan had won the game for a number of years in a row, and Woody Hayes brought his team in before the game, and he had every kid. He had 100 kids on the team, a large squad, and you know, out of those 100 kids, probably about 30 to 35 kids played in the game. And Woody Hayes asked each kid to. He asked the question, I'm going to ask each member of the team, what are you going to do tomorrow to help us beat Michigan? And he got the returns back from each kid. And in the starters, you know, they said the appropriate things, like I'm going to throw 3 touchdown passes, or I'm going to make 20 tackles, or you know, I'm going to play the best game that I can possibly play as an offensive tackle. And then he'd get down to the kids who he knew would never, ever, ever see any action, and kids would be, you know, he'd be reading from the 18th string halfback. You know I won't play in the game tomorrow, but I'm gonna yell and cheer 100% for my teammates on the sideline. And another kid would write, I know I'm not gonna see any action tomorrow, but I'm gonna be playing this game just like I'm in there myself. And just an amazing amount of comments that were brought out. And you know, the next day, Ohio State went out and beat Michigan rather handily, and Woody Hayes said, we won the game today not because of the 30 to 35 kids who played in the game, but it was because of the 60 or 65 kids who were just such an emotional, uprising from the sidelines. The kids really got into the game, and he said it was one of the most wonderful things he'd ever been a part of. And I picture those things happening in the Fitchburg and Leominster game. The kids, everybody gets so involved in the game. It's just it's a very nice thing to be a part of.
It's a Twin City setup, and like now, the Leominster coach and the Fitchburg coach are very good friends of each other. They work together here in Leominster, and there's no animosity between them. And I think the whole thing is that when somebody's got to win, somebody's got to lose, unless they have a tie game, of course. But in that respect, I think we just take things as they come. But the whole thing now is Fitchburg is a little bit down because they've had a succession of losses, but they'll come back. I'm sure they will.
Well, Leominster has been very successful the last 10 years due to a number of reasons. They've had outstanding coaching, and they've had some great football players, and they have a great football program. But those of us in Fitchburg, we think we have some outstanding coaches and outstanding players, and we think in Fitchburg that we've turned the corner. We've had some great classes come up. Some of our younger players, our sophomores and our juniors and our seniors, this is our 4th year here now, and we've had 4 winning seasons in a row, which is something that Fitchburg high school football team I don't think has accomplished in 35 to 40 years. We know our day is going to come, and we're very, very excited about that, and the kids are excited. They're working very hard to get us on a par with Leominster. We're not very far behind Leominster, and we feel as though we don't have to we don't have to be second banana to anyone in regards to our high school football program. We're very proud of what we've accomplished in Fitchburg, and we know that our day is going to come in regards to Thanksgiving. So hopefully it will be this year. If it's not going to be this year, it'll be next year, but our day will come.
Ed was the one that always gave the halftime pep talks. But he used to tell us, you can win every single game all the way through the year and lose the Leominster game, and he says, nobody will ever remember you. You can lose every single game during the year and come out a winner in Leominster. He says, and you're a hero, and you're a hero forever.
It's been 4 years now since I haven't played football back in Fitchburg High School. And I thought after a time like that I'd probably lose a little bit of my anger about losing to Leominster back in '79 when I did. But when you come back and the leaves are on the ground and maybe there's a little bit of snow in the air, you start to think about the time when you played and when you lost. Because in '79 we did lose, and that anger and disgust of having the loss, having to lose against Leominster, really isn't that far away. It's been 5 years, and I think that after 10 or even 15 or 20 years, I think that anger and those feelings of defeat are always going to be there.
The reality of the situation is that you're going to be the person that's going to live with this for the rest of your life. And there are situations, Leominster's won 11 years in a row now, and there are situations now that I hear many, many times of kids that played for Leominster High School that were the last team that lost to Fitchburg. And they want the Leominster kids to win on Thanksgiving, but they've been carrying the burden of being the last team to lose to Fitchburg for 11 years, and it's really affecting a lot of them, and it bothers them quite a bit.
When I was growing up, I wasn't a very good sport. I hated to lose, and I learned a lot of lessons in life on how to lose, because there's an old saying, you show me a good loser, and I'll show you a loser. And I didn't want to be in that category, but there's ways of learning how to lose and being a gentleman.
If there is a universal lesson, a quintessential lesson, it has got to be that I learned, I guess, as a 5th grade, when you knocked on your proverbial ass, they get your face in the mud, in the manure, they stomp on your head, and they spit at you, and you get up. And you keep going at them. They can't beat you. You just keep coming. I think that's the greatest lesson to life, because life, through the Leominster-Fitchburg game, through any other series in the country, is surviving, is adjusting. Life is coming back from all sorts of astonishing obstacles. I think we all go through that. Illness, divorce, sickness, for an athlete, rejection, defeat, loss, but yet despite that we keep coming. We keep our fists up and our head high, and that to me is the greatest lesson from especially football, obviously, where you do get knocked on your rear end quite a bit. So that perhaps to me is the greatest life lesson known. If everybody could have that philosophy, when you have a down day, when things aren't going well, when you're beaten, bedraggled, and you come back the next day.
When the chips are down, you gotta always come back. I mean, it has so many effects in my everyday life. You know, it's just as football does. It's all very psychological. When I have a lot of work at school, or when I'm low on money and things just aren't looking good, you know, I just have to say, okay, it's the 3rd quarter now. I still have some more time to go. I gotta suck it up, and I really got to be tough in these last couple, you know, and I'll get over it, and we can overcome, we can win.
We try to depict football as a game of life, and we used to try to tell them that scoreboard up there, that score, that tells the whole story, and but not many people realize or can imagine the amount of work, the experience, the togetherness, the fire, the determination that goes into that score, how it got up there. If they could only see what these boys put up with, and how hard they worked to put that good score up there.
There's no question in my mind that it makes a boy realize that when he's out there, he's working hard and things get tough and you want to throw in the towel and you say, well, I just can't do it. I've got other guys with me out there. There's 11 of us. We have to stick together. I have to do my part to make things go, to make the play work, and I work even harder. When it's hot out there, the kids, they want out, but again, they say, no, I just can't do it. I've got to stick it out, and I've got to work and work even harder, because if I don't do my job, the next guy's job won't get done, and so forth. So I just feel as though it's the greatest lesson that can ever be taught in any sport, and I've coached 3 sports. I've played in 3 sports, and there's no question in my mind that football has to be the toughest and the most rewarding sport there is.
I don't think there's a greater teaching, learning experience for young people than to play the game of football, because just like many times in our life, we're confronted with illness in families and splits in families and all kinds of hardships. And sometimes in that game of football, we're down 20 points and we've got just very few minutes left to go, and we've got to just suck it up from the ground up and come right on back and do our best. Sometimes it works that it's just only an individual and that individual's effort that will bring us into a victory. And sometimes it's an entire team that requires that kind of effort, that momentum, so to speak. In the same way in families, it requires sometimes an individual in the family of staying up long hours over a sick bed, or going miles and miles out of his way to get to a funeral, or that kind of thing that ties the family back together. In our work experiences, we see things like that every day, that sometimes we don't think that we can go on, but that individual effort and that individual training that we went through, that tenacious to succeed at the cost of our physical being many times in football, where you've got to just suck up all the hurt and the pain and go just another step further.
Doug McIntosh, Stan Cry, Al Beacott, Eddie Lagoa, and John Normandy, Mike Valera.
Uncles and brothers and fathers talk about it all their lives. From the time they were in grammar school, all of a sudden you reach a certain point in your age where it means something to you, and then you play 3 years, and then all of a sudden it's supposed to be all done. And just by seeing 11,000 people at the game every year, once you know that it's not all done after 3 years, it's important your whole life.
As a coach, we used to say you're going to remember it for the rest of your life. It's going to be something that you're always going to talk about come Thanksgiving. And we, hopefully, if you were a player and you won the game, all you did is smile and talk and joke and visit friends. If you weren't from Leominster and you lived someplace else, you moved out of town, many of the athletes come back and they get involved with the Thanksgiving hoopla. Coming back on Tuesday or Wednesday and spending 4 or 5 days here and going out and having a couple of libations with their friends and visiting and talking about this game, and it just kind of brings everybody together. And as I said, if you win the game, boy, it's a lot of fun. If you lose the game, you have to bite your tongue a lot.
We established some kind of a friendship, even though we might have been mortal enemies on the field, but off the field, we were good friends, and it was always a great day when I could ever meet a fellow from Fitchburg that played against me, or I'd played against him, and we'd sit together and talk, and I realized that there's a little more to a football game than just going up there trying to win.
That was a game that while for that day you're going head to head, and I think that the fact that Marco Landon and I were teammates in high school made that very easy for me to put that Leominster-Fitchburg rivalry in perspective, that we were and still are the very, very closest of